There's not a more classic off-season topic than debating whether or not a player is a generational talent. But with Jeremiah Smith, is there even a debate? One of our analysts says to pump the brakes. Plus, we just saw a general manager sign a multi-million-dollar contract, so we would like to know what actually is a college football GM. And Ohio State is on top of the sport, but building on the Buckeyes' success won't be easy, with key pieces leaving the program left and right. Also, Riley Leonard joins the show. Ryan Wilson hits us with his latest mock draft. All that and more as the ultimate college football show starts right now. Welcome into the ultimate college football show. Cooper Patagna, Smoke Dixon. I'm Emily Proud. This is our very first show, so I feel like I should explain what we're going to do, right? I mean, we're going to have some fun, but we're also going to talk about what's really happening in the sport of college football. We have so many smart people that are going to join us on the show today, join us throughout the off-season as we talk about what you want to talk about, what the fans would like to discuss. And so we're going to start today's show by giving you some water cooler talk. This is what everybody is talking about at the office today, and it actually comes out of the NBA. That is, of course, the Luka trade, AD involved as well. I think this was one of those moments, honestly, guys, where you think, where was I when this dropped? We all have that exact moment, just something that shook you, but we want to take a little college football turn on it. So, Smoke, I'm going to start with you. What's a moment that you think back to, something that happened in the college football world that was that similar moment of like, whoa?
Well, just going back to it, I'm thinking about when Nick Saban said, I'm out of here, and I'm retiring. The ripple effects through coaching, recruiting, personnel, everything. It was just like a shock to everybody. And like my family members, Coop, they're just getting over this. And it's a year.
The group chat, I'm sure, was going crazy. One of those things, yeah.
Group chat game was crazy that day.
I thought it was fake. You know, when I read it, I saw Shams breaking it. I was like, there's no way. The Lakers just do what they do. They somehow find their way to get their hands on a superstar. Now LeBron James, probably another title run. But from a football standpoint, I think the only thing I could really think of is when Travis Hunter flipped his commitment, took the Jackson State hat out of the bag, and decided to go play FCS for Deion Sanders. I've never seen anything like that. So if there was an equivalent, I think that would be it.
Yeah, I mean, there's been a lot of jaw-dropping moments in college football. I think back to maybe what we've seen with college football realignment. When I got that notification that Texas and Oklahoma were joining the SEC, or USC and UCLA were joining the Big Ten, that is just one of those moments that will always stick with you. And certainly, that trade that happened 2 nights ago, or I guess early yesterday morning.
Early
it
in the
happened
morning.
very late at night. One of those moments that really shook you. Another moment that we want to kind of find a college football equivalent to is what we saw at the Grammys last night with Kendrick Lamar. I'm not going to pretend that I can explain every detail that went into the beef that is Kendrick Lamar and Drake, but I think it's safe to say that this is a pretty one-sided rivalry when it comes to those two rappers, considering that Kendrick just swept every single category that he was involved in last night. So it made us think, what is a feud that is completely dominated by one side of the rivalry? And let's start with you, Coop.
I'm getting educated on this. I don't know a lot about Kendrick Lamar. Used to back in the day, more of a Vampire Weekend guy. But I think about more of like Michigan last 4 years against Ohio State. If you're an Ohio State fan, you're probably saying, hey, we just won the national championship. I get it. But there is like a distinct psychological advantage that exists right now with the Wolverines when they go to face Ohio State. And you think about Kendrick Lamar and Drake. I mean, Kendrick Lamar's got to be living in Drake's head right now. He's probably not getting a lot of sleep, and that's probably what's happening with Sharon Moore and Ryan Day.
Yeah. What's yours?
We talk about sleep. Did any of Nick Saban's assistants ever get any sleep leading up to that game? And when you talk about it, Nick Saban just crushed all of them. And then the pettiness between it, when you have Lane Kiffin throwing up the popcorn, or Jimbo's just speaking outside of his mouth again at some golf outing, knowing that Nick's taking his notes. But for me, Nick Saban just running through all of his assistants. All the secrets that I gave you, I didn't give you all of them. I'm going to take this one back and win games.
I like that one.
It was one of those things, too, where going into every single matchup with a former assistant, we hyped it up. Is this going to be the guy that officially does it? Although this is kind of just a fun, casual conversation, I did bring stats to this.
Like it.
So Nick Saban versus former assistants, 28-3. Grammys with Drake and Kendrick Lamar. Kendrick has 21. Drake has 5. So that actually is fairly equitable. I'm not going to do the percentage for you. That's all I've got in terms of numbers. We're not going to bog you down with that. But we do want to talk about some of the real things that are happening in the sport of college football. That's just our fun way of getting into the show. But in order to talk about what's really happening, it's time for some College Football Confidential with our friend John Talty, who is joining the show now. And John, a lot has happened in the world of general managers when it comes to college football. We see multi-million-dollar contracts being handed out. I know that there's still some sticker shock from Courtney Morgan at Alabama a few months ago. But before we get into everything that's been happening, I want to start with, John, what is a college football general manager? What do they do?
Well, the great thing about that, Emily, is it depends, right? It's school to school. There are different definitions of what that role is. And I think that's really what's so unique about this moment in college football is that if you go to the NFL, you know what a general manager is. There might be a little bit different power structure program to program. Sometimes the head coach has more of a say. But generally speaking, the general manager at the NFL is going to make draft picks, be involved in free agent signing, be involved in hiring, firing. At the college level, for the most part, that's not the case. A lot of those responsibilities are really on the head coach. And the GM could be more of an evaluator, could be more of a glorified recruiter, could be a cap person. There's all these different ways that people are using them right now. And I think that's where we're seeing the evolution of it. I think what you're seeing, though, is some more NFL guys are starting to come into the game. I talked to Mike Lombardi at UNC the other day. I think he's probably the best example of that, a former NFL general manager now working with Bill Belichick, being heavily involved in the procurement of players, salary cap, all of those different things. But every program is doing it differently, and so sometimes you have a guy who's a GM who's not really that involved, and other times you have someone like James Blanchard at Texas Tech who really is kind of a general manager at that college level who's heavily involved in offering players and bringing guys into Texas Tech.
What I think is so interesting about this discussion is we have two guys who have experience in front offices in college football. Smoke, of course, was a former general manager. So it's been a couple of years since you were a GM. But what was that role when you stepped into it versus what maybe it's evolved into even just a few years later?
Well, going into it, I just wanted to be solely on personnel and the structure and the construction of the team.
Like the NFL.
Like the NFL. I wanted to know what Coach Loxley wanted the University of Maryland team to look like and build it through his eyes. I never wanted to be the 11th recruiter, but if there's a person that I've kept some type of contact with or we've made some type of connection, yeah, I'll help recruit them. But I never wanted to be the closer or the lead because that was more of a position coach or an assistant coach or somebody around there. But looking at it, it wasn't really me.
Yeah, I think the definition of a general manager, like John was bringing up, really comes down to the head coach, what head coach you're working for. So what Kalen DeBoer might ask of Courtney Morgan or Joey McGuire of James Blanchard or Chad Bowden and Lincoln Riley, which, Chad Bowden, first time I've ever seen it, but he put out a statement after he got hired and thanked the AD, right? So we are entering a completely different time of college football where the relationship between and the balance between a college head coach and the general manager is very, very different. And all these guys are going to have very, very different responsibilities. Even my first 2 years at Washington, my only 2 years, that's an evolving relationship. Hey, this is what we expect out of you. Hey, versus this is how we think your skill set can best translate to impacting the bottom line for our program. So different places are going to value different things. And right now for North Carolina, Michael Lombardi, who John talked about, Mike Lombardi probably has a better grip on 98% of, or more than 98% of college player personnel executives out there, just having to deal with the CBA in the NFL, right? Now on the high school side, he's probably flying blind a little bit. He's probably drinking through a fire hose. It's relatively new to him. So there are a lot of different factors when you start looking at GMs. It's not all the same one job.
But that's where the fine line comes in, though, Coop. You have to have a good balance of, yes, understanding cap, roster construction, but also have the understanding of where are those high school connections? Who am I going to talk to if I want to go into South Carolina, the low country of South Carolina? And not having that can have you behind the chains a little bit when it comes to high school recruiting. The portal side, I think they're going to crush it. But the connection on the high school side, they're going to struggle a little bit until they get some high school, college coaches that can come in, understand the area, and recruit properly for them.
Yeah, you guys nailed it. And it's interesting. That's kind of exactly what Lombardi told me was that, they, I think, are comfortable with the portal, very comfortable with salary cap and things like that. But, they just didn't have those pre-existing relationships, right? And I think that to start in the portal, when you have to strike fast on guys, usually it's based on pre-existing relationships. You recruited them out of high school, maybe you finished second, kind of kept in touch. They hit the market, you can strike fast, and you can add a guy and get him on campus very quickly. They just really didn't have a lot of those relationships to start up. So I think it was, a little bit of a struggle maybe for them to get it going initially, even though they knew what they wanted and had that kind of lockstep vision between head coach and GM, which I think is so critical. I think they'll have even more success moving forward, building up some of those relationships, and of course now filling out their staff with guys who do have, lots of recruiting chops, down the line.
The NFL had the Senior Bowl last week in Mobile. And what I thought was really interesting, you talk to a lot of young scouts where a lot of these guys, they get their start in college football. But the more transactional that college football becomes, the water gets warmer for these guys in the NFL. The other thing that is not lost on these scouts that have years and years of experience is the money. Financially, you were seeing GMs at this level get 7 figures. And a lot of guys in the NFL, they look at some of the guys that are getting this job and they say, you know what? I can do that. What are we even talking about? And I'll do that. Listen, if we're going to work all the way around the calendar, 12 months out of the year, I might as well be being financially compensated for it. So I think what you're going to see here is you're going to see more crossover between the NFL and college from a personnel standpoint than we've ever seen before. And I think it's going to make it a more competitive marketplace. But you're going to be seeing a lot more guys with Michael Lombardi. There's some names out there right now that I think a lot of people would be surprised about to see that are really kind of involved in some of these collegiate GM jobs.
Yeah, I mean, I'm glad that you've mentioned the money side of it, not just from the salary of the general manager. But, John, I want to get your take on this because, Cooper mentioned the NFL side of it, and we could see a little bit more of that trickle into college football. How does the financial side of it in terms of managing a roster financially and everything that could potentially happen with the house settlement and rev share, how does that factor into the importance right now of a general manager?
Yeah, it's critical. And to Cooper's point, I've heard from agents, search firm people that they're getting a lot of interest from guys in the NFL. And it's for a lot of the reasons that Cooper laid out. It's that there's a lot of money to be made. And, there's kind of this new opportunity to grow maybe beyond what they're doing in the NFL right now. The challenge, at least from some of the people that I've talked to, is that, again, like we said to start the show, it's not quite a general manager job yet. So the skill set that might be very applicable in the NFL hasn't quite been there yet at the college level. I do think that's where it's evolving, though, because, again, if you have experience negotiating contracts at the NFL level, well, that is very valuable right now. If you have experience putting together staffs, putting together different, scouting teams, whether it's scouting the portal, that's experience that these guys are going to have had from the NFL looking at different teams, getting ready for free agency. So I think the skill set that people have in the NFL is becoming more and more applicable to college. I think that's why, again, you're seeing more and more people want to get involved and having to negotiate with agents, having to deal with the challenges that come with that. That's where I think someone with NFL experience could have a lot of success. I think the key, and I think Smoke made this point earlier, is that pairing that person maybe with a player personnel person who has more of a recruiting background, who can help them navigate the unique challenges of the college system where, again, there's essentially 2 free agencies right now. It's a little different than NFL. Guys haven't been able to sign binding contracts. There's all these unique things from college that do not apply to the NFL that those guys are going to need some help kind of getting up to speed on to start things off.
You have experience with both, Smoke, NFL and college.
And where it comes in is just understanding what your head coach wants.
Yeah.
And to me, there's always been 3 types of different evaluators or general managers. Well, you have Brandon Beane, for an example. Brandon Beane's strength is putting together a staff that works well with each other and just dividing up and delegating out jobs. Then you have Omar Khan, that's up there at the Pittsburgh Steelers. That's really a cap guy. Mm-hmm. So he has to have strong personnel people around him to do so. Brad Holmes now, he wants nothing to do with the cap. He's just a pure talent evaluator. So when you look at it, your head coach is the one that needs to align everyone and make sure that whoever that he brings in the building, if his general manager is a cap constructor and his DPP is the one that's going to evaluate a lot of the film and set the board, well, this is fine. But you have to make sure that alignment and make sure that everybody understands exactly what their job is on a day-to-day basis.
These jobs are so vast. You talk to people that are interviewing for them, and they're not this glorious jobs that I think a lot of people think, oh, you're a general manager of this school, or you're working at one of the top programs in the country. That is not really the case. 20% of your job, if you're lucky, is doing the things that you got in the industry to do. It's talent acquisition, it's talent acquisition, building a board, and really impacting the bottom line. Somebody's got to do the contracts, right? The role of the recruiter in the general manager is gone. Now it's the negotiator. Now the skill sets are starting to evolve, and head coaches, athletic directors, they're starting to adapt as this landscape changes rapidly. And the skill set that you might think traditionally of a roster builder has changed. It's more about, yes, identifying players that we want on our team, but it's also about identifying and establishing value year to year financially. And I think that's kind of where the new age general manager comes into play.
And it feels like for the most part, I guess from like a conversation standpoint and just from a general know-how amongst NFL fans, is they understand what a GM is. We know because they're critical of them oftentimes. But John, why is it important for college football fans to understand what a general manager does for their program?
Well, I think fans are starting to get it. I think you see the reaction to USC hiring Chad Bowden, or if you think about the reaction to Alabama fans and keeping Courtney Morgan when USC initially went after him. I think you're seeing that fans are starting to realize the importance, especially the fans who are probably watching the show. They probably know who their GM, because these are the hardcore fans who love it so much. And I think that's where you're seeing some evolution. I do think if you're a fan, why should you care? Well, for all the reasons that Cooper and Smoke just laid out. I mean, this person's going to be involved in putting together the roster. When you think about, why guys might join the team from out of the transfer portal, maybe your GM's a great negotiator. Maybe that's why you're able to get a guy on a good deal that's able to allow them to spend more in other areas. I think that's all going to be really important moving forward, as I think, especially in the House era, if that goes forward as we expect, I think there will be more money. And I think how you spend your money, how you evaluate, where you place it, I think is going to be huge for which programs are the most successful. And so if you have a GM who can execute the head coach's vision, I think that's going to be huge. And I think the other thing, and again, every GM's a little bit different, but I think for a lot of GMs, they're taking off responsibilities from the head coach. They're dealing with, parents calling is upset, all right, maybe the GM's handling that situation when they talk about more money or how they can best use that player. You're freeing your head coach up to do the things that are most important. And so I think having that partnership is really important. And that's why you're seeing schools spend upwards of $1 million to make sure that they have the right person to pair with their head coach.
Yeah, to John's point, these guys matter. I look at LSU as a perfect example. I think Brian Kelly's first 3 years in Baton Rouge is kind of a testament to a guy that got down to Baton Rouge and said, hey, I want to compete for a national championship. I had done it at Notre Dame. I wanted to do it at the highest level. But down there, you're swimming in a completely different end of the pool. Year 3, he hires Austin Thomas from Ole Miss. Austin Thomas has been all over the place. Now the associate AD in Baton Rouge. What they have done in the last 2 years or year and a half cycle, both on the high school side to marry that up with the transfer portal, that matters. They have the number 1 class in the transfer portal. They have a top 10 class in high school. That work within a span of 16, 18 months will change the short and long-term projection of LSU's program. And without that person, without that structure, that ceases to exist. And that happens in Oxford with Billy Glasscock. That happens all over the place. Chad Bowden in South Bend deserves a ton of credit, right? So these guys matter. You have to be the eyes and ears, as you know, for the head coach when he's focused on winning ball games. Who is the person that's going to advance the agenda for the program, worried about 2026, 2027, 2028? What are the things that we need to do to stay ahead of the competition? That's their job. They have to keep their program one step ahead of the opposition, and that's why these guys matter. I'm very, very glad they're starting to get the credit that they deserve.
You hit 2 things on the head, Coop, and that was really the way that you project. And being a really good GM, you have to be able to go into a room and say, hey, you know what, we have 3 guys here, but I'm projecting the one that we have lower to be the best one in 2 years. So you just have to sit there and just believe in my instincts and my understanding of what it is. And then also setting your roster and making sure that you have 3 guys. We can't have them stacked in that way, but making sure they have multiple positional flex within your team. So you know if you lose a running back, that running back can go over and play linebacker. Why? Because you're putting that time in to understand that we're over athleticism than just one positional player.
Yeah, this role of general manager is just going to continue to get more and more important as the sport continues to change, which is why I'm so glad we did some College Football Confidential with our friend John Talty. John, appreciate you being here. All right. If you want more John Talty, you know where to find him. 247sports.com, also cbssports.com. He is the one-stop shop for all things that are happening behind the scenes in college sports. And if you just want to know what's happening in college football in general, head to 247sports.com.
The best damn team in the land resides right here in Columbus. The national championship trophy is back where it belongs in the great state of Ohio. And no matter where you are, over the next year across the globe, when you hear someone say, "Oh wait," you say,
May not have been the season we all expected for Ohio State, but definitely the finish, I think, when we looked at this roster on paper. We thought this Buckeyes squad could be the team to lift the college football playoff trophy at the end of the year, and that's exactly what they did. So much talent on this team, but I want to hone in on one guy in particular who we've talked a lot about. We're going to continue to talk a lot about. That is freshman wide receiver Jeremiah Smith. We're already throwing out the term generational talent when it comes to this guy. I think that we have to define first what generational talent means exactly. I think it's safe to say that us naming him the number 1 player in last year's class was absolutely correct, but it's one thing to be in that extra upper echelon. So, Coop, what does that mean to you? Why do you think there's maybe some truth to that discussion?
All right, you and I are on a different side of the coin here on this
Gotta be
conversation.
friendly,
Now, I think the biggest thing that we need to establish is common ground before we head into this conversation. Very important. And I thought about that because over the last 2 years, I'm sitting here, I'm thinking to myself, you know what? That gets thrown around way too much. And we're talking about generational players. Last year was Caleb Williams. We'll see. Last year was Marvin Harrison Jr. We'll see. The list kind of goes on and on. So what is a generational player? And when you're talking about a guy like Jeremiah Smith, what does that mean? Like, let's get into the nitty gritty, right? We're talking about a guy that was born in 2005 of November, a guy that was 18 throughout much of his freshman season. And if you're going to put him in that Gen Z, which is where he fits with, right, which is going to be some guys after him that are included as well, the guys that come to mind are guys like Justin Jefferson, who is on pace to really kind of break almost every receiving record in the NFL. Jamar Chase comes to mind. CeeDee Lamb comes to mind. Those would be the guys. Then I would ask, who are the generational guys out of those 3 maybe that come to mind for you? And I could get on board with Justin Jefferson. My point with Jeremiah Smith is I think he's a walking definition of what a generational talent is. There is so much ambiguity around what the definition is, but to see a guy with his size, 6'3", 215 pounds, this is 3 straight years of 1,000 yards receiving, and people will say, well, yeah, 2 years back in high school, the genetics, the cousin of Geno Smith. You talk about a guy that broke pretty much every record at Ohio State, receiving yards in a game, 187 against the number 1 team in the country in the Rose Bowl. Big-time players make big-time plays in big moments, right? The other one, receiving yards in a season, receptions in a season, belonged to Chris Carter, TDs in a season. I get it. They played a longer season. I understand all that. Here's the thing. I knew he was the number 1 player in the country. I get the accolades. You go back and you say, what tells the truth here? The tape. And you watch the tape of this guy, watch every single target last night. He's the best player I've ever scouted. And I don't say that lightly. I've been alive for 32 years. I've been consuming football since I was 5 for 27 years. This is it. By far, this is a guy over the last 35 years. You look at all the guys in the Hall of Fame. You look at all the guys that have led the NFL in receiving. And I know this is long-winded. There's maybe 5 guys that I would take at the same position. Randy Moss, Terrell Owens, Calvin Johnson, Julio Jones, Jerry Rice. Okay, so the combination of the size, speed, athleticism, ability to beat you anywhere on the field, take the top off the defense, the strength at the catch point, the dependability, all of it. If God could create a receiver, he'd create Jeremiah Smith, and he is perfect in every single way. So I think he's got a gold jacket. If he stays healthy, all that thing's coming down the line. Not only do I love this kid, I respect the way that he plays the game. The social maturity is off the charts.
So you like him a little bit?
I like him a little bit. He's the man. He is
Look,
the
I see
man.
your face throwing.
Well,
They told me to say 2 sentences, and I said
no,
two and a
no.
half minutes.
I let
He's
you.
clearly
Cook.
very
I let
passionate
you
about
cook
it.
for a long time because
like
this is
it.
your guy.
He's
And
not my guy. He's Andrew Ivins' guy.
Well, Coop, you went on for a while now.
Well,
This
Smoke,
is
is Jeremiah Smith a generational talent?
no.
Why not?
I think he's a very good football player. And when you hear the conversation, you hear the comment, you hear once in a generation.
Mm-hmm.
Like you hear once. I've seen this before. This is Andre Johnson. This is Andre. If you want to put him in the Julio Jones category, I don't believe so. Is he a better college receiver than Julio Jones? Absolutely, because Julio wasn't a developed receiver. But you talking about specimen, catch the ball at 2 yards, put his head on the goalpost. I've seen Jeremiah Smith get caught from behind. I haven't seen Julio get caught from behind. And when I talk about generational talent, you have to have said, I've never seen this before on this athlete. Forget the accolades, forget the stats. We're talking about pure ability and skill set. Does he run a 4.2? Does he run a 4.3?
Probably 4.4s.
Yes, 6'3", 215, 4.4. You can find those guys. But you're not finding 6'3", 4.3, vertical 42, broad jump 11.4 on a broken foot. That's what Jonesy did at the combine. And in the first 10 years, Jonesy had more yards, production. He put 350 yards on an NFL player. So when I'm talking about generation, I want to see a player that I've never once in my lifetime going to see. That's Shaquille O'Neal. That's Megatron. That's Tyreek Hill. I've never seen speed and burst from a guy like that ever. But I've seen this guy before. And I'm not doubting that he should be the first overall pick whenever he comes out, or he's either number one recruit of last year. Absolutely. The best receiver in college, no doubt. But generational talent, no, because I've seen this before. I played against it before.
Granted, he's 18 years old. He hadn't even scratched the surface. Everybody looks at Jeremiah Smith and they say, oh, Jeremiah Smith, I've seen him. Listen, Julio's going to put up better numbers at the combine. He did. And I get that point. Julio was not as developed as that kid. And that's probably an argument in Julio's case. I completely understand that. Best football is ahead of this kid. He's different cat, different breed. You also have a couple years on me. No offense. You know, I watched Julio Jones when I was a kid as an LSU fan. This cat is the most different kid I have ever seen. And it's disrespectful to call him a kid because he's a man amongst boys. He also stepped into an offense that had Emeka Egbuka, who's a first-round receiver, that had Travion Henderson, that's going to go day 2 of the NFL draft, that had Quinshawn Junkins, that's going to go day 2 of the NFL draft, that has a perennial all-pro on the other side in Caleb Downs, JT Tuimalau, Jack Sawyer, go down the list, Denzel Burke, all these guys. Who's the best player on the team? Hands down. At 18 years old, making a lot of guys that are going to make a lot of money on Sundays very stupid. So, look very stupid, excuse me. I understand the argument. That being said, generational, what generation are we talking about? If we're talking about a once in 100 years, yeah, Julio Jones is the guy that you would compare him to. The fact that this is even a conversation to Julio Jones's skill set at the age of 18 is a testament to Jeremy.
And what I'm saying to you, it's not a conversation with Julio Jones. It's a conversation with Andre Johnson.
I respectfully disagree.
Andre's a Hall of Famer.
And I'm not taking anything away from Andre Johnson.
If you look at their stats and look at the way they play, very similar.
From a physique standpoint.
Temperament, play, style, Andre. Like you don't see Jeremiah put 1 foot in the ground and explode like a wind.
I did. Multiple times. I went back and I can go. I can show you the Oregon game. I can look at multiple examples. Big Ten play. Him running away from defenders at 215 pounds. It's all there.
So
And I also want to see the time he got caught.
We just watched him get caught. Go back and pull game film up. You've seen him get caught from behind.
You and I can
In
go
the
do it
national
after the
championship
show.
game?
No. But go cut the
just
film
saw it.
on. He's gotten caught from behind.
We'll watch it.
So, Smoke, if it's all measurables for you, I think like you're disagreeing on the fact that Cooper's saying the fact that we're having this conversation now at 18 bodes well for his future. But if you're saying it's just these measurable things that he doesn't have now, is he ever going to be considered a generational talent?
To Coop, yes.
This
To
is
Gerald, no. And to most
To
people,
you.
no, not to
Okay.
me. Not to me. I don't
Okay.
think I think he's a very good
So the
football
conversation
player.
is wrapped up.
It's
for you.
wrapped up for me. He's a
Even
good
though he's
football-
18 years old.
18 don't matter. You knew when Julio Jones stepped on the field at 18 years old, you knew he was different from everybody. You take Julio and drop him in the 90s, he's the best receiver. Early 2000s, the best receiver. 2010s, the best receiver. You take Julio, prime Julio right now, and put him in the NFL. He's better than Jefferson, Chase, and all those guys. And those guys aren't generational players either. They're very good football players. There's nothing wrong with that. But don't throw them in the word of generation because I've never seen anything
I
like
think
that.
we have a different idea of what generational means.
Once in a generation is the word that we usually use.
Okay.
Okay. This is a very interesting discussion, and I want to get one more. Oh, see, we're friends here. I want to get
Always.
one more person's take on this because we're going to welcome in our friend Dave Biddle, who is here from Bucknuts.com. And Dave, we're going to have a deeper discussion about everything happening with Ohio State. But I'm curious your perspective. What do you think about this talk of Jeremiah Smith, generational talent? You've seen him up close and personal there in Columbus. What do you think?
First of all, if you're an Ohio State fan and people are arguing, is he better than Julio Jones?
It's a
or
good
not?
discussion, yeah.
Business. I will say this, being a Bengals fan, A.J. Green was taken one spot ahead of Julio Jones. And if A.J. Green had Matt Ryan throwing him the ball and Andy Dalton not throwing him the ball, who knows what we'd be talking about. Maybe A.J. Green would be ahead of Julio Jones. Both are great. Another thing I'll say, being a Bengals fan and following Ohio State and the Bengals very close, tell you what, Jamar Chase is fantastic. He's a generational talent. Jeremiah Smith, to me, is basically Jamar Chase 3 inches taller. Here's why. He catches the ball, and he's like a running back. Okay, he's got the best ball skills I have seen. He goes up and catches it. Oregon had a play where they had 3 guys on him. Didn't matter. He just went up and caught it. So he can do all of that a tall receiver can do. But then he can do the same thing that a Jamar Chase can do. You throw him a little screen pass, he can go the distance. He's tough as heck. He's very disciplined. He's absolutely a generational talent.
Okay, there we go. Last word here from Dave Biddle. I will add Jeremiah Smith had 11 more touchdowns than our friend Julio Jones did as a freshman, Sophie. But like you said, this is a good problem to have if you're comparing a freshman wide receiver with one Julio Jones. Let's get into what actually happened this season for Ohio State. I'll call it complicated. You had the loss to Michigan. You had fans wanting to fire Ryan Day at one point. But then you win a national title. So, Dave, how do you encapsulate what this season meant for Ohio State?
Yeah, it's unbelievable, Emily. It's a storybook. It reminds me so much of 10 years ago where Ohio State was left for dead multiple times, rightfully so. Entering camp 10 years ago, Braxton Miller got hurt, left for dead. Then they lost to a very average Virginia Tech team at home, left for dead. And then J.T. Barrett gets hurt against Michigan, left for dead. And then they go on a magical 3-game postseason run. This year was 4 games, and we'll never know for sure, Emily, but I wonder if they didn't lose to Michigan, would they have still won the national championship? Everybody at Ohio State would tell you, yeah, we still would have won the national championship. But that seemed to have woken them up and really motivated them. And it was a magical run. And then despite Ryan Day's 1-4 record against Michigan, including 4 straight losses, he's a legend in Columbus for life now, winning this national championship. National title banners fly forever.
Yeah, a natty cures all, as they like to say. Looking at this roster, I mean, we just discussed Jeremiah Smith, but also Cooper fired out some fantastic players that we're going to see go in April's draft very, very high. What can other programs maybe learn about how this Ohio State team and its infamous $20 million roster was constructed?
I think the biggest thing is keeping your veteran players around, which is would not have been possible in the pre-NIL era. Now, if you're going to be a top 10 pick, good luck with that. But if you're a second round, third round projection, which Ohio State had a lot of those guys that came back, guys that were main cogs on this national championship team, Jack Sawyer, J2 Tuimoloau, I could go on and on and on. That's the main thing, Emily, is keeping your veteran players around. That could be second day NFL draft picks, but get them to come back for one more year, take care of them when they're still making a lot of money, and maybe they can increase their draft stock and win a national championship, or at least compete for one. And then the other thing is you have to do well in the transfer portal. What's crazy is I've heard people say Ohio State bought a national championship team. Well, they brought in all of 5 transfers. 5. They just hit on all of them. They had Will Howard, Quinshon Judkins, Caleb Downs. Seth McLaughlin was the best center in the country, won the Remington Award, even though, he was lost for the season with an injury late in the year. And then Will Kazmarek wasn't like a home run, but he was a really good, backup tight end. So they only brought in 5 transfers, but 4 of them were grand slams. So the biggest thing is keeping your players around. Player retention is the number one thing, and then you have to hit the portal. That's number 2, and it's a close number 2.
And the players they're retaining are the ones that they recruited. So could you maybe make the argument that recruiting is still the lifeblood of the sport, despite the fact that the transfer portal gets all the shine these days?
Absolutely. I think if you have a good culture in college football, like, you're going to keep the majority of your players. If you have like mass exoduses of players you want to keep, that is not a good sign. And you're going to lose players. Ohio State lost players even after the national championship run. Guys that stuck around, will have a ring, already announced they're going to be in the portal. But even before then, they lost a couple of guys. That's going to happen. That's natural. But if you have like tons of guys leaving, not good. So it says a lot about the culture of any program when guys that could leave stick around and, want to be part of. Ohio State calls it the brotherhood. Some people make fun of that. But these guys are pretty tight. I've never seen a team really this tight. They really lacked clicks. You see football teams, they all have their clicks, right? This team, I'm sure they had their clicks, but maybe the least amount of clicks I've seen on a football team.
We've all been in high school. We've all been in college. We know that's sometimes just the dynamic of how it goes. All right, for all this talk about retention and bringing back guys, man, that has not applied so far to the coaching staff in this offseason. You lose both coordinators. You lose your offensive line coach. A lot of them going to the NFL, but of course the Jim Knowles to Penn State is a gut punch a little bit when it comes to going to a rival. But overall, I mean, where does Ohio State go from here in terms of filling those very important spots?
Yeah, I think they're going to do a lot of hiring from within, Emily. Ohio State fans might not be thrilled with that, but Ryan Day, I think, has earned the benefit of the doubt. And by the way, he was hired from within too, so he probably, has a little bias there. But I did see this stat that Nick Saban during his time at Alabama went through 9 different offensive coordinators and 6 different defensive coordinators. So maybe this is just goes with the territory if you're lucky enough to win a national title. Hopefully Ryan Day, for his sake, can win maybe a third of amount of the national titles that Nick Saban won. But yeah, I think what they're going to do on defense is they're going to promote Matt Guerrieri and Tim Walton, who are the secondary coaches right now. I think they're going to be co-coordinators. Ryan Day, it spoke volumes to me, Emily, at the national championship celebration at the Horseshoe last Sunday, said Matt Guerrieri is one of the rising stars in our profession. He's one of the most brilliant minds, young minds in college football. I'm like, wow, this young man is 35, and Ryan Day is saying that about him at the national championship celebration. That's not a lot, but you're not going to promote him over Tim Walton. So I think those guys are going to be co-defensive coordinators. They're going to bring in someone from the outside, and looks like Brian Hartline is going to be the new offensive coordinator. New in quotes. He's had the title of offensive coordinator even last year with Chip Kelly here. Brian Hartline wasn't co-offensive coordinator. He was offensive coordinator / wide receivers coach. He didn't call the plays. He didn't call the plays the previous year. And maybe he won't call the plays this coming year. Maybe it'll be Ryan Day again. But Brian Hartline sounds like will be the new offensive coordinator. And I won't be surprised if they bring in Kevin Wilson back to Columbus as a co-offensive coordinator, O-line coach.
If Hartline is calling those plays, we're going to see a lot more of Jeremiah Smith, as if that were even possible when the wide receivers coach gets promoted there. How do you anticipate the offense to change depending on who ends up calling plays?
Yeah, I don't think it'll change too much because this will still be Ryan Day's offense. It really will. Like, even with Chip Kelly here, it was really, I mean, obviously those guys, like, Chip Kelly was Ryan Day's mentor until Ryan Day became the boss, which is a heck of an interesting dynamic. So I don't think the offense is going to change tremendously, but obviously, Emily, whoever is the offensive coordinator is going to have their fingerprints on it. It's interesting with Brian Hartline, him being a wide receiver, you think, oh, yeah, it's going to be pass happy. But then when he played at Ohio State, he played under Jim Tressel, a little bit more of a running guy. But one of Hartline's years, they were kind of pass happy. Troy Smith won the Heisman in 2006 when Hartline was a wide receiver at Ohio State. So I don't think the offense will change too much. They're very determined to be balanced, running and passing. But, if you're a wide receiver, you're probably not too upset if Brian Hartline taking over the play calling duties.
Certainly makes you feel good. But as you have pointed out, you got to follow the mentors, too, to see potentially who those guys learned under. Dave Biddle, thank you so much for tying a bow on this Ohio State season and looking ahead a little bit. We do appreciate it. You can check out more of his work at bucknuts.com. We didn't even get into the 16 of 22 starters that this Ohio State team has to replace from that national championship winning team. We didn't get into it on this show, but I guarantee you they are all over it at bucknuts.com. Coop, let's talk NFL.
you, Emily. And if you like mock drafts, CBSSports.com is the place to be, as right there you see Ryan Wilson, also known as the GOAT, one of the best NFL draft analysts in the industry. His top 10 of his first round, Cam Ward, off the board, number 1 to the Tennessee Titans. Without further ado, we welcome in my friend Ryan Wilson, who has been busy at work in Dallas at the Shrine Bowl, Mobile at the Senior Bowl. He's also been busy babysitting Rick Spielman as well. That is a full-time job. Ryan, I want to start with this one, man, about the player who helped themselves the most this week, and you want to talk about consistency in Mobile. This guy was a model of that.
Good to talk to you, buddy. Yeah, Gray Zabel, right? Let's start there. North Dakota State, played left tackle in college last season. Does have some experience inside, and that's where his NFL future is going to be. They had him at guard and center during Senior Bowl practices, and he looked like he'd been playing there since he was born. It's a fun story because when you talk to folks down there, the takeaway outside from the football was that he's going to be a team leader from day one. And Cody Mock came out of there, second-round pick of the Buccaneers. He reminds me a lot of Graham Barton, last year's first-round pick of the Buccaneers, played left tackle at Duke, kicked inside, and had a lot of success early. And it feels like Gray Zabel has a chance to be that sort of dude. Came in probably as a day 2 guy. May have left Mobile, Coop, as a day 1 possibility, so we'll have to find that out as we get through this draft process.
I love to hear it, man. I loved watching him. You talk about a position-versatile guy that can play pretty much anywhere on the offensive line, center, guard, that versatility. Like you said, I think day 1, a distinct possibility for Gray Zabel. I also want to talk about some head turners as well. You and Rick were laughing on the With the First Pick podcast as you were talking about the gossip on the field as Mike Tomlin, who was he coaching? And one of those guys, man, Oladeju from UCLA, a head turner during the week. You also got some other cats out there as well.
Yeah, so Olafemi Oladejo goes by Femi, goes by O2. Rick nicknamed him O2 Joe. We'll see how that works out. Linebacker, originally from Cal, transferred to UCLA and played linebacker till this year because that linebacker room was so deep. So he said, you know what, I'll go out and play edge. And these clips tell you all you need to know. His coming out party was Penn State, where he put that right tackle in a blender what felt like 10, 15 times a game. You talked about the Tomlin conversation before Wednesday's practice, Coop. I was eyeballing those two through my binoculars and asked Femi about it afterwards. And he's like, I was just picking his brain on some of the best guys he's coached. And the name that came to mind was Derek Brooks, Hall of Famer. That's not a bad guy to pattern yourself after. So Oladejo was a big-time player there.
Really cool to see Mike Tomlin in his element. The guy obviously loves coaching very, very much, as we saw him with a very hands-on approach. It's a money league, right, in a lot of different ways, but money in terms of positional value, just as we talked about with Gray Zabel, it means a lot. So these teams trying to identify guys that can do a lot of different things. Tell me what you thought about Jeffrey Bassa, a guy coming out of Oregon, but a guy that had a really, really good week, not only in coverage, but flashing a little bit of that physicality that I think a lot of teams wanted to see between the tackles.
Yeah, fun tape in the fall, and I was excited to see him get to Mobile, and he pretty much extended what we saw him do for Oregon during the season. And you talk about the athleticism and the ability to find himself around the ball consistently. His instincts were better than I thought on tape, and that's a good thing. And this class is pretty deep on the defensive side of the ball, Coop, as you know. And I think these off-ball linebackers are starting to have a resurgence like running backs are, and you start to take these guys higher because it's an east-west game, sideline to sideline. You have to have guys that can run down the ball, and Bassa did that in the fall, and he sort of reinforced that with what we saw in Mobile for those 3 days. I want to see how high he can end up going. He feels like a day 2 guy for me, but it's so deep at edge rush, defensive line, and even in the secondary. We'll see if some of these linebackers get pushed down, but a good week for Bassa for sure.
It shouldn't shock people. Like he's going to test off the charts in Indianapolis at the NFL Combine as well. Ran 11.2 coming out of high school there in Utah. Also a guy that played receiver, safety, can do a little bit of everything. So he's got a little bit more of an opportunity to continue to increase his stock here over the next couple of weeks. Speaking of, Ryan, I think one of the things that we like to do when you're down there at the Senior Bowl is, hey, who are some of the guys that are maybe kind of catching your eyes a little bit individually that might not be day 1 or day 2 guys, but a guy that could be a sleeper in day 3? Did you find one of those guys there in Mobile?
I don't know if he's going to be a sleeper. Everyone knows who he is now, but I want to talk about him. Jack Besh, LSU transfer, made his way to TCU. We obviously know the story about his brother, but he balled out during the season, and we didn't hear a lot about him because it was TCU, and he just carried that on in Mobile, was the player of the game as he should have been, the MVP, and he's a high-point catch machine. You see that here. He has long speed, and if he gets in the open field, he's going to either run over you or you're not going to catch him, and I don't think he's a day 3 guy. I think he's a day 2 guy, and my comp for him, and you know this young man very well, Coop, Puka Nacua. Now, they play different positions, but I think you can line him up anywhere, Jack Besh, and he is going to be a guy in the right system, cough, cough, LA Rams, where he's going to put up huge numbers. So that was fun to see last week and him have the success he deserves coming off what was a really impressive season at TCU.
Yeah, competitive temperament. Those guys are really kind of wired the same way. Puka Nacua, obviously coming out of Utah. Jack Besh, a guy that started his career at LSU, resurgence in Fort Worth. Ryan Wilson, we appreciate you. As always, guys, make sure to check out his mock draft at cbssports.com. You can also find With the First Pick with Ryan Wilson and Rick Spielman wherever you find your podcasts, and make sure to scan your QR code right there.
We are so excited to welcome in Riley Leonard to the show, former Notre Dame quarterback, also current NFL draft hopeful. It's crazy, Riley, how quick you have to flip that switch. But along those lines, you are fresh off the Senior Bowl. You're still in Mobile, Alabama. That's just how fresh it is. So I'm curious from your perspective, though. It's a whirlwind of a week between meetings and practices and games and everything you got going on. But what was the most valuable part of that experience for you?
Yeah, a lot of people want to talk about the loaded schedule that we had, and yeah, it was pretty exhausting, but it was like the best week, one of the best weeks of my football career. Like, I absolutely loved the Senior Bowl process. I think one of the most unexpected things is just being around the best of the best players in the country and seeing how humble and how good of a person everybody was probably the biggest takeaway that I had. I mean, I built relationships just in a couple of days that are going to last me a very long time. So seeing those guys and the way that they handle themselves, the way that they treat each other, and putting a team together in just a couple of days of practice was really fun.
Riley, Emily mentioned the quick transition from the national championship to the Senior Bowl there in Mobile. I'm interested, like in your mind, you go from that game to one of the biggest job interviews of your entire life. What was the biggest thing that you were trying to prove last week in Mobile?
Yeah, obviously it was a quick turnaround. Going from South Bend into Alabama was kind of tricky for me because we had like 8 inches of snow. So everybody down here in Alabama had no idea what to do. I was telling them, like, did they put salt down on the roads yet? And they were like, what's salt going to do? Like, what does that mean? Like, nobody even knows, like, how to handle snow. So it was a wild process getting down here. So I had, like, 1 day to prep my footwork and things like that. So it was overall just a wild turn of events. But I try not to make anything bigger than it was. I mean, honestly, going from the national championship game, nothing can kind of intimidate you more than that. So anything else is just kind of a walk in the park after playing in a game like that.
I like how now that you identify as a northerner from your 1 year in South Bend, you can help out all the southerners with the snow, because I'm sure that was a very new process for them. So although I'm sure you're ready to flip the script and flip the page, as we like to say, and get ready for the NFL, we're still talking about what happened in college with you, because obviously a spectacular season ends with a national championship game appearance. I'm more curious from the standpoint of, we've been talking a lot about your head coach over the last few weeks and everything that he was able to do in the postseason. So as a player, I mean, what is it like playing for a guy like Marcus Freeman?
Yeah, it's a great question. I'll give you a couple examples of kind of the guy he is. When I was in the recruiting process, before I even committed to Notre Dame, I watched like this 2.5 hour podcast on Tom Brady, and I sent it to him. And 3 hours later, he told me he watched the whole thing and wanted to talk about it. That's just kind of the guy he is. Another thing he likes to do is bring up all the custodians and introduce them in front of the team, because he really doesn't treat anybody differently from another. So his mother, I think, was a custodian, so he kind of has that perspective. And yeah, he's just a great man, somebody I look up to, and he's also just an extension of the team. I feel like, running out there on game day, although he doesn't have pads on, it feels like he's just like an upperclassman teammate that just hypes you up and you're ready to go. So he has our respect as a person, and then can get us going before games as well.
Riley, I want to talk about that opening drive in the national championship. Maybe one of the gutsiest that I've ever seen. You ran the ball 9 times. I looked at you at the bench on the bench, and I was concerned that you might not enter that game in the national championship. I just kind of want to know personally, how much did that impact you the rest of the game? I know you're a competitor, but just give us a little inside look on what that kind of felt like the rest of the game.
Yeah. That drive, obviously didn't feel too great on my body, but I didn't really feel it too much. I had a lot of time to recover on the sideline after that one, but I was definitely a little hurt out there. But after that first drive, I didn't really affect the way that it probably looked like I didn't run the ball as much the rest of the game, but a little bit of that was just due to the circumstances, given that we were down. By a lot going into halftime, and knew we had to throw the ball in the second half to be able to come back. So we were kind of in 2-minute mode that whole second half, which obviously means we're not going to be running QB, counters and QB draws. We kind of got to get the ball spread out a little bit and rush to come back. So obviously, honestly, I felt pretty good the rest of the game. I know I took a lot of hits that first drive, but it didn't. I love that. I love taking hits. I love getting the feel for the game early. So if I couldn't have, written it up any better.
Yeah, nothing new for you. You have been doing that your entire collegiate career, and I'm sure that dates back to high school. And speaking of, I can't believe we've made it this far, and I'm the first one to, I guess, wish you a happy belated Riley Leonard Day, because I hear that the mayor of the town you grew up in officially declared February 1st as a day dedicated to you. You went back to your high school. You spoke there. What was that day like for you to come back after playing in a national championship to your roots and speak to people that really got you to where you are now?
Yeah, it was a crazy day for me for obvious reasons. It was really cool to have my mom, my girlfriend, and everybody there. But I always tell people the character that you see in me is just a reflection of where I grew up and the great mentors that I had. So a lot of them were there in that gym that day. But for the mayor, Miss Sherry, to present that award to me, it was crazy because I don't feel like I'm very deserving of it. It kind of caught me off guard, but for her to honor me like that really means a lot. And every day I just wake up thankful for the situation that I'm in and for the community that kind of gives me a little extra motivation whenever things aren't going well.
Yeah, well, I know that they're all anxiously awaiting your next move, where you're headed in the NFL. I'm sure they're going to be buying up your jerseys soon enough. But Riley Leonard, thank you so much for joining us today. We so appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. Jesus bless.
So much fun talking to him. Check out our partners at Irish Illustrated. They'll talk a lot about Riley Leonard's draft process. They're all over it there. And then, of course, he's off to the NFL. So what's next? A quarterback for the Irish. Our friends at Irish Illustrated have you covered there. The 2025 class is officially, I wouldn't say completely done, but this is how things will stack up when it comes to the rankings. A few more pieces that have to get moved around for Wednesday's National Signing Day, but ultimately we can declare Texas as the #1 team in the 2025 class, followed by Georgia, Ohio State, Alabama, and Oregon. Let's welcome you here in studio. Tom Loy is here with us now. We have Cooper Patagna, and Texas is the #1 class in 2025 for the 17th straight cycle. An SEC school is at the top of the class recruiting rankings. Tom, how did the Longhorns get it done this cycle?
Well, I know that they spent the money the right way,
Yep.
but there's really so much more to that. This staff, led by Steve Sarkisian, is so focused on relationships and doing things the right way. And I think when they're dealing with these prospects, like the loads of 5-stars, you're talking about Jonah Williams, Justice Terry, all the guys, Jamie French right there, top 100 guy. All of these guys bought into the vision that the Texas recruiting staff, the Texas coaching staff sold them on. And obviously a lot of those guys want to come in and play with a guy like Arch Manning. I know Cooper, I don't think is a bigger fan of Arch Manning than you. I just feel like they're buying in. They think that they're going to start this long-term dynasty at Texas, and everybody is bought in. I mean, it is pretty impressive. I did go there this year at one point. I was in Austin during the season to kind of check it out, see what they're doing, and I get it. Like, everybody is on the same page. It's impressive what they're doing inside that building. Special group, and they landed a special class.
I think we wanted to know, what is it going to look like post Nick Saban, right? And you think about Kirby Smart, you think about Steve Sarkisian. Who's going to be the team that seizes the opportunity? You look at Steve Sarkisian, Texas, what they've been able to do. I mean, think about this. You got to protect your home state, especially when you produce the amount of NFL talent that they do. They keep Jonah Williams home. That was a big one. They finned off Oregon. They finned off LSU. So they did a wonderful job also. They're getting into the Sunshine State as well. Think about guys like Jamie French, Grayson Littleton. They're starting to find their ways into states like Georgia, Florida, and a lot of people are going to say, well, that has something to do with NIL. It does. But these guys, that alignment that we were talking about earlier, Steve Sarkisian, Brandon Harris, they've done a tremendous job, deserve a lot of credit. That's why they have the number one class in the country.
So Texas is the number one class. The number one player is quarterback Bryce Underwood, and there was a little bit of late drama going into early National Signing Day. He flipped his commitment from LSU to Michigan just 2 weeks before National Signing Day. Yeah, that is the number one player in the class doing that. Tom is our insider when it comes to all things recruiting. How just truly earth-shattering was this move as it pertains to this cycle as a whole?
I mean, look, again, NIL helped, no question about it. That was important. But this really shook up when Jim Harbaugh left, because I was told, matter-of-factly, there was zero shot Bryce Underwood was going to play for Michigan and play for Jim Harbaugh. I don't know if it was necessarily a personal issue with him or if he just didn't feel like he was a priority, whatever the case may be. But as soon as Sharon Moore took over, that's when things really started to heat up for Michigan. And then again, NIL, obviously a huge factor, but the staff did such a good job of connecting with this kid and showing him that this bright future, you don't need to go to LSU. You don't need to go anywhere. You can put on for your home state, for your hometown, and for your home city and just be a Wolverine and have this special career. I mean, they were so ready to move to Baton Rouge and play for LSU. They were building, I think they were either building a house or buying a house. The whole family was moving. They were locked in to be Tigers. And then obviously things shook up. Alan True, national guy, does a phenomenal job. He was all over this. I feel like we were texting daily on Bryce Underwood watch. Is he going to show up to Michigan? Is he not going to take the trip this weekend? All in all, I mean, huge get, difference maker, and potentially we'll see how things play out, but potentially a day one starter.
Yeah, hear me out on this. Tinfoil hat. This might not be the worst thing that happened to LSU football, because you get Garrett Nussmeier back for another year. They take Michael Van Buren in the portal. You look at LSU. I talked about Austin Thomas, that staff in the front office, and you think about this. They had the number one class in the transfer portal. So what Bryce Underwood could represent, that pot of money. You throw him in with Jakeem Stewart, who goes to USC. All of a sudden, LSU's sitting there with $2.5–3 million. This is a team and a head coach that needs to win right now. They've been really savvy with the work that they've done in the transfer portal. LSU, if they play their cards right, they should be able to bounce back long-term as well, but they're all in for 2025.
Yeah, the response has been fantastic, bringing in the number one transfer portal class. Bryce Underwood is one of 4 5-star quarterbacks in this group. Anytime you bring in a 5-star QB, you want him to be the guy. Overall, looking at this quarterback class, we got the guys in this group, Coop?
Yeah, we got some dudes. I mean, Bryce Underwood is the guy. I know they brought in Mikey Keene to supposedly be of some type of window dressing competition. That will not be the case. Bryce Underwood will be the guy. You're paying him all that money. He better play, right? So outside of that, you look at Tavian St. Clair, going to be a little bit more of a slower burn, right? And I skipped Keelan Russell, who I can't believe I just disrespected like that. I mean, you think about Alabama and their quarterback situation. Nobody's talking about it, right? Jalen Milroe's taken a ton of criticism, but think about Keelan Russell, what he enters. Ty Simpson, you think about also the other quarterback, Austin Mack, who they brought over from Washington as well. It's a wide open race. Dylan Lonergan's off to Boston College. Ryan Grubb back in the mix. I don't know. Kalen DeBoer's got to win in year 2, but there's something special about Keelan Russell. And then the other thing, Hassan Longstreet could play a lot earlier than I think people expect. And he's tied to Lincoln Riley. That success there. Jade Maeva, we'll see what happens, would be an ideal bridge quarterback. But Hassan Longstreet is wired to want to play early, so that's going to be interesting to see how that shakes out.
Then the interesting thing with Keelan Russell and Austin Mack, I mean, Grubb and DeBoer recruited him to Washington. So they Like, that's their guy.
I know him, yeah.
But still, you don't keep Keelan Russell on the sideline. You don't keep Tavian St. Clair. And there was a couple other guys, Malik Washington, Deuce Knight, guys that just missed that 5-star. All in all, I am so fired up and so high on the 2025 quarterback class.
Yeah, so if you got a quarterback in this class, you should be pretty darn excited. That's the fun stuff. The part that I want to ask you guys is this February signing day is, I'll call it a dud in terms of action. We're not anticipating a ton of moves happening on that National Signing Day coming up on Wednesday. That was not the case too long ago. This was the day when it came to the recruiting calendar. So what is it that you've seen, Tom, that has made this day maybe not as action-packed as years in the past? What's changed?
I just think people are over it and they're ready to make a decision. There's not a whole lot of flip-flopping down the stretch. It was pretty quiet even in December when we were talking. I know we had the David Sanders Jr. excitement, whether he was going to sign on Monday or Wednesday or whatever, however that or Wednesday or Friday. But for the most part, it was pretty quiet. And these guys are trying to make a decision and be done with it. And they've spent the last 3 years being recruited. So, I mean, I don't know. I just think it's a case where these guys are over it, and you have a couple stragglers down the stretch, but these guys have just simply been ready to be done with the process.
Calendar has been accelerated since I got out of the game in, I don't even know, 2020, right? 4 years ago. And the calendar just keeps getting moved up and moved up and moved up, and the quicker decisions, right? We see the spring official visits, summer official visits. These guys, by the time they start their senior year of high school, already have a pretty good idea of where they're going. So you've seen signing day, February, really kind of take a back seat. And on top of that, I think people are fatigued, right? The consumer, you think about the college football playoff, you think about everything that happens in the first week of December, transfer portal as well. It's a lot.
Real quick, do we need this February signing day?
No, insignificant.
What do you think, Tom?
I'd keep it personally,
keep
but
it?
that's just me. Just for the stragglers, the coaching changes, just a couple guys, I think it's worth it.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that because I'm already hearing in my ear I've gotten in trouble for not doing a good job of promoting our Wednesday National Signing Day by calling it a
by the
dud.
way.
So the day might not be as exciting, but this show is going to be fantastic. We're going to tie a bow on everything that's happened in this cycle, but we're also going to look at the overall classes in this cycle. So that means transfer portal, that means recruiting, just what your squad did to get ready for the 2025 season. So tune in for our National Signing Day coverage right here on the 24/7 Sports YouTube page. That show is presented by the Ultimate College Football Show, which you just got done watching today. Thank you so much for joining us for our very first episode.